Hello, I am John, and welcome to Book Capacity. It's time to share my June book recap. A little later than usual, as it is July 3rd at the time of this recording, but better late than never. Sometimes life gets busy. As far as quantity of books, June was not really the best month for me per se, but as far as quality, June was a really big success. The big reason I would call it a big success is that I accomplished, in my opinion, the greatest literary feat in my 32 years of life, which will explain why my number of books read this month was lower than usual. What is this literary feat, you may be wondering? Well, let's jump into it and go over the books that I read for the month of June. This book has been on my feed for the longest time. It has intimidated yet fascinated me at the same time. This book tends to get almost universal hype, which usually leaves me skeptical. However, as an avid reader, I feel like I had a responsibility or a duty to read this at some point in my life. My birthday was in June, and at the start of the month, I set a goal for myself to read this book before my 32nd birthday. And I'm happy to report that I accomplished this goal. I usually like to hold the physical book when talking. However, I was out of town when I finished the book and decided to leave the book at my parents' house just given how bulky it is. So forgive me for not having the physical book on me, but let's jump into the Count of Monte Cristo. As far as plot overview of this book, it is nothing but pure cinema. 19th century France. You have this young man named Edmond Dantes. Edmond is an honest, intelligent, pure-hearted, and has his whole life ahead of him. He's about to be a captain of a merchant ship and marry the love of his life. Those close to him frame him for treason for being loyal to Napoleon. He is falsely imprisoned for 14 years. He escapes and discovers a hidden treasure where he forges a new life for himself and begins this extensive process of revenge against those who wronged him. In this book, there are vast time jumps. You get thrown into so many worlds in this book. You get thrown into Napoleonic France, the streets of Rome, and the island of Monte Cristo, just to name a few. Throughout these time jumps, you begin to see the transformation of our pure hearted character Dantes into someone who's a crafty, sophisticated, and many ways mysterious count who rewards generously on one hand and on the other brings a dish of revenge, which I would compare to like death by a thousand cuts. We do not just follow the lives of Dantes and those who wronged him. For example, we learn about their children's lives and the many subplots with many different characters. With all of that, you can imagine this book is about to be pretty thick. And you would be right. My version was about 1100 to 1200 pages. Now, back to my assessment. This is one of the greatest pieces of literature I have ever read. However, if I'm talking about my personal experience, there are other books that I have read that I enjoyed just a little bit more. At times, I had to pause to remember the names of various characters, and the middle of the book can be kind of a grind. Yet it does not take away from the journey as a whole that the book took me on personally. I can see why this is many people's favorite book. This is the longest book I have ever read in my life personally, a goal I was so happy to achieve in my literary journey. I do not want to spoil it anymore because coming into this book with as much of a blank slate as possible makes this experience 10 times better. Yes, it is dense. It will probably take some time. It took me time to finish it. But the journey to finish it from beginning to end is all up to you. Reading is one of those few things in life that we can really just enjoy at our own pace. It is also pretty accessible to read for being a dense book printed in the 1800s. Amazing reading experience that I will always remember. Go ahead and check it out for yourself. You're not going to be disappointed. How can I top finishing The Count of Monte Cristo? Well, finishing the Lonesome Dove series was the easy answer for me. I'm talking about The Streets of Loredo, the final book in Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove series. In Streets of Loredo, we follow one of our favorite reoccurring Texas Rangers. I'm talking about the legendary, infamous Woodrow Call. He is an older version of himself who is on the hunt for a young, terrifying, and honestly just pure evil bandit named Joey Garza. This book follows Lonesome Dove and takes place about 10 plus years after the events of that book. This bandit Joey is robbing trains, killing people, and doing just despicable things along the Texas Mexico border. The railroad company hires Woodrow Call to put a stop to it. You also have some reoccurring characters from Lonesome Dove that reappear in Streets of Laredo. I'm talking about P.I. and Lorena, who are now husband and wife. P.I. is striving to be a stable family man. Call tries to recruit P.I. to hunt this bandit with him, and Lorena stops him in his tracks. All of these characters have really changed throughout the course of Lonesome Dove and this book. Hal is reflecting on if he realized too late that he is no longer capable of his horse riding, gunslinging way of life. The reflections that some of these characters have on so many subjects like love, time, friendship, and life are just so deep and I really enjoyed reading about. There are similar traits to Lonesome Dove in Streets of Loredo, but what really surprised me about this book is just how graphic in parts that it is with some of the violence in this book. So just a heads up if you're a little squeamish to that. The characters are written in a way that is just simply brilliant. Larry McMurtry's character work is just pure goated. Some of the deaths or brushes with death that some of these characters face in the book just make the experience so powerful. You experience so many emotions all at once. Now, as brilliant as I found this book, it does not top Lonesome Dove, but it is a really great book. I may have this as my number two favorite of the Lonesome Dove series. Emotion may play a small part in that ranking because I started this series chronologically, and as a result, I have basically seen a lot of these characters' lives pass by and how they have developed. So I feel like I was on this journey with them in some ways, as corny and as a little funny as that may sound to some of you out there. All that to say, one heck of a book and a fitting conclusion to one of the greatest series I've ever read in my life. Streets of Loredo, certified banger. What an experience. You will not be disappointed. Go ahead and check it out. I was scrolling on YouTube one day when I saw this one clip that described this particular book as one of the funniest books ever written. Who doesn't love a good laugh, right? So I decided to give this book a try. I am talking about A Confederacy of Dunces. We follow our main character, Ignatius J. Riley. He is a 30-plus-year-old unemployed man who lives with his mother in New Orleans during the 1960s. He is overweight, gassy, and somewhat delusional about the world around him. A situation unfolds in which Ignatius's mother has to make some steep repayments that they cannot afford. As a result, this forces Ignatius to look for work. The book revolves around his journey to find a job. He ends up working at a clothing manufacturing plant and even as a hot dog vendor where he dresses up like a pirate and notoriously ends up eating most, if not all, the hot dogs and passing gas along the way, which I just found hilarious. He also meets some other characters along the way who clash with his worldview and creates just this amazing dialogue full of richness. As I mentioned before, Ignatius has these somewhat delusional, outdated views of the world and life, which is funny because he's actually well educated that we learn in the book. He even tries to ignite a riot when he's working at that manufacturing plant due to what he sees as unfair wages and conditions of the workers. Even though Ignatius is quite an offensive character, his actions and chaos lead the reader to critique the conditions of, capitalism and the absurdity of what we accept in society. It also made me think of the clash between conformity and individualism. Our main character is against the social norms around him, and this sets him apart. However, as we know, sometimes it's futile to overcome the wave of pressure to conform to the world around us instead of kind of blazing your own trail that we discover in life. There were definitely funny moments in this book where I laughed quite a bit. Was this the funniest book I have ever read, though? No. From my research I did on this book, it seems like you either hate or love this book. However, I feel like I'm somewhere in between, but I can see why this book is really just polarizing. Ignatius reminds me of that character from South Park, Cartman. Yes, he is quite funny and absurd, but he's also quite offensive. He's sort of a man-child and has traits that would just really make me not like him as a person if I were to meet him in real life. It can definitely rub people the wrong way despite the humor Ignatius brings to the story. All that to say, this was not one of my favorite reads of the year. However, don't get me wrong, it was not a bad book by any means, but it just didn't hit the mark with me personally, despite having some A tier comedy moments. Maybe I'll reread this book someday to see if it hit differently for me, but I would still encourage you to check it out and form your own opinion, especially if you just like books that are just absurd, full of chaos, and has an anti hero character. Go ahead and check it out, see for yourself. I follow a decent number of book themed YouTube channels, and this book appeared on my feed. The description just stuck with me, and despite the growing number of books on my TBR shelf, I decided to push this one to the front of the line. I'm talking about The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. Our story starts off with two deaf mutes, John Singer and Spiros Anatopoulos. They are best friends who live together and work in this mill town in the Deep South in the 1930s. Spiros ends up being institutionalized. Singer feels lost without his friend and ends up moving to a different town and ends up living in a boarding house. This is where we are introduced to a variety of new characters that really shape the book moving forward. We have Mick Kelly, a teenage girl whose dad owns the boarding house Singer lives in. She loves music and is very charismatic. We have Jake Blount, an alcoholic drifter with a strong passion for labor rights. We have Biff Brannon, who owns the lone diner in town, which is like a gathering point for all the people in the town. He kind of knows everyone. Finally, we have Dr. Copeland, an African American medical doctor who loves his family and has a strong passion for equal rights for his fellow African American community. All of these characters are drawn to John Singer in some way. As a result, Singer lets these folks into his life by offering his time while the characters share their hopes, their dreams, and their fears. They tend to view Singer as this figure that they can express their feelings to without a fear of judgment. Mick is dealing with growing up and the potential burden of leaving school to enter the workforce to support her struggling family. Dr. Copeland is dealing with his failing health and the racial injustice happening to him and his family. Jake Blount is dealing with his anger at the labor conditions around him while he reflects on his life and the nature of man and society. Singer does his best to understand all these people, but he really can't. He is still nice and polite, but he feels just as lonely as these characters do, unfortunately. Speaking of loneliness, loneliness is a big theme in this book. Despite all these characters being acquainted with one another and living in the same town, they tend not to work together to help each other out. It's really sad because Singer feels lonely too, despite all the attention he receives. Throughout the book, he makes different trips to visit his friend Spiros, but he knows things will never really be the same between them as before, and this really just makes him sad. I think this is one of the biggest tragedies of this book. All these characters come to Singer for an outlet to express themselves, but no one really asks how Singer is doing and tries to learn more about him. I do not want to give too much more of this book, but just know that this book is very character driven as opposed to action packed, as we learn about the characters' lives and how they react or they do not react to the social factors going on during this time. This book takes place in the 1930s in the Deep South. So you're exposed to the effects of the Great Depression, racial inequality, and the inevitable arrival of World War II. I really loved this book. It is not a feel-good novel, but the other themes really stand out and make this book really just a rich read. It made me smile at times, but it also made me sad and it made me reflect. Loneliness and isolation are really present, and if I were to take away one lesson from this book, it would be just be nice to one another. You never know what someone may be going through, and just lending your ear and time to someone can make a huge difference in one's life. Do not be afraid to check on your friends, family, or loved ones. Odds are they will be happy just to hear your voice and hear how you are doing. One fact about this book is that the author was only in her early 20s when she wrote this book, which I found just amazing because this book was just brilliantly written. It also has the Oprah's book club seal of approval, if that means anything. So, give it up for Oprah. Again, just an amazing book that I'm surprised is not talked about more. Go ahead and check it out. You will not be disappointed. One of my favorite reads of the year. Well, this concludes my June book recap. Looking ahead to July, I'm currently reading Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, which I am really enjoying. After that, I'm not sure where my literary journey will take me next. I have a lot of books on my TBR shelf that I know I have to get through, so we'll see which ones I choose. These next 2 months may be really busy for me, so I'm not sure how this will affect my reading time, but I will do my best to maintain my consistency with my reading time. I'm also thinking about other video ideas besides my usual monthly book recap, so let me know if you have any ideas as I try to explore that a little bit more. This concludes my video for you today. Again, thank you so much for all the support. I know there are a lot of options out there for book content, but taking time out of your day to view one of my videos just means the world to me. Feel free to continue to like, subscribe, or comment on the books I have shared, or books you recommend to me. I always welcome all that feedback. Until next time, stay safe and happy reading.